So, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, and the insurance industry. I'll try to keep it within the deadlines. We have quite a program this morning. I wanted to start with a few things. Why do we care? I think that's a fair question. We all have heard about, InsurTech, about Internet of Things, about artificial intelligence, and other topics, including, blockchain, smart contracts, big data, etc. I'm going to focus on artificial intelligence and Internet of Things, and Frank will speak about smart contracts, and Philip will tackle the cyber insurance topic. So things change very quickly. We've heard a lot in the last few years about fintech. So fintech has been having a major impact, so technology applied to financial services, but more on the banking and finance side. And the impact has been seen as major, and on the other hand, the insurance industry seemed to be rather not disrupted by technological change. There is a consensus that this is now changing, and I believe this consensus is right for a variety of reasons, which I will mention today. The insurance industry is next, and is in line for probably a massive disruption. Artificial intelligence, as I said, is just one of these major disruptions. Also, what we refer to as InsurTech today, so mainly, a lot of startups coming up with bright ideas on how to change the world, is going to be called insurance tomorrow. Actually, a lot of the technologies that are seen as groundbreaking are already being integrated by major insurance companies. And depending on the insurance companies, this is seen as either strategic, very strategic, or a matter of survival, which goes to show the importance of these topics. Also, artificial intelligence is just, it cannot be seen in isolation from everything else. What we've seen so far in the industry is a little bit like fintech. What we've seen is small startups, usually set up by people who are not from the insurance industry, coming up with very clever technology, and that they are now applying to insurance companies. What we are seeing now, beginning to see now, is experienced insurance professionals going and trying to set up real insurance companies from scratch, or taking up existing insurance companies and completely transforming them, which is, of course, a major challenge. So things change extremely quickly. If any of you follow Twitter, every morning you will have 10 new, 20 new topics on this. You have figures coming out every single hour. I've compiled a few figures so you can see them. This is from Accenture's. So Accenture is doing a lot of work on these topics. 79% of insurance executives agree that AI, so artificial intelligence, will revolutionize the way they gain information. I have a few ones that came up yesterday. During the last 2 years, there were about $5 billion invested in artificial intelligence in about 605 deals. That's $5 billion, that's quite a lot of money. Also, one of the topics that is always on the minds of insurance companies and companies in general is the millennials. And how do you interact with millennials? 43% of them say they would pay a premium to interact with hybrid customer service, so artificial intelligence coupled to human intelligence. So that's quite a lot. And 63% of consumers believe AI will help solve major problems of society. So that's a study that came up yesterday. I think it's PricewaterhouseCoopers who came up with these figures. So if you want to interact, if you have a question, if you don't understand, please interrupt me. I think it would be useful to have some interaction, and it's one of those topics where it's probably livelier, especially on this Friday morning after the wine tasting, if we can have some discussions. So we've had already one with Matti, whom I thank actually because he pointed out to me that the definition of artificial is made by humans. So I think it's a good way of introducing the topic. So, I mean, lawyers have said last year as well, we always like to start with a definition and a caveat. So I don't have a caveat for you, but the definition is there. It's John McCarthy, who was a professor at the time in 1956. He was a research fellow at MIT. He then went on to become a professor at Stanford in the US. And he came up with that definition, science and engineering of making intelligent machines, especially intelligent computer programs. So AI, artificial intelligence, includes a lot of different concepts. I will not go into too much detail. Cognitive computing is basically the emulation of human intelligence. Machine learning is, I will pause a little bit on machine learning. It's something we hear a lot. It's a lot of one of these terms that are being used quite frequently. It's very interesting for insurance companies. Why? Because machine learning is exactly what we do. So machine learning means that the artificial intelligence, the software basically, will teach itself from experience. So a little bit like humans do. Why is it relevant for insurance companies? Well, pretty much because the insurance business is based on anticipating risk, and machine learning helps a lot in that respect. I will give you some examples later on, and that goes as well to data science. So machine learning is fundamental in a lot of the technologies that we will briefly touch upon later on. Now, for insurers, why do insurers care? I would say insurers are impacted in three different ways. First, artificial intelligence is a tool for insurance companies, as I will give some examples later on. So insurance companies and reinsurance companies actually will be using and are using artificial intelligence. So they're users in very different ways. Insurance companies are also impacted because this generates new risk. So it generates new kinds of business. And there's perhaps a third point, but I will not go into it so much, but perhaps Frank will. Insurance companies will end up being parties to contracts, parties to transactions that involve artificial intelligence. So I would say these are the three main dimensions of insurtech in general and artificial intelligence in particular. It's a tool, a risk, and an interaction. A tool for insurance companies, the applications are literally endless, and I've listed the 10 levels of impact for insurance companies. We'll get back to some of them, but obviously it goes from the very design of the product to data optimization, actuarial, legal, and compliance. We're seeing a lot of technology and artificial intelligence being applied to the legal side, either within insurance companies or within law firms. We do a lot of work at Clyde Co on these things, and the potential of today's technology, and especially of tomorrow's technology, is just stunning. So I may not be here in 5 years, maybe doing something else, and a machine may be doing my job. A few examples. You have medical care that's fundamental, again, in the context of insurance. You have artificial intelligence being used in medical prosthesis. So you can have an artificial limb which will be powered by artificial intelligence using machine learning, which means that this prosthesis will use artificial intelligence and learn from the behavior of the person wearing them. So I can already see that you can anticipate the legal implications of this type of devices. Self-driving cars, obviously, you've all heard about the self-driving cars and all the potential liability issues and others that they may imply. But of course, you have education, entertainment, drones, which I will mention briefly later on. And the first thing that we're seeing on our end is the major impact that is the most visible, not necessarily the most fundamental, is the different interaction with the policyholders, the insureds, the beneficiaries, basically the customer interaction. You can have very personalized interface. So I don't know if any of you have tried going to the website of this American company called Lemonade, which I will mention later on. Lemonade was, Lemonade has excellent marketing, but they also they were one of the very early adopters of a purely online underwriting, very simple, very intelligent. And if you go on the website, it's Lemonade Inc., so it's an American insurer, and test the underwriting, try to get home insurance for, say, a building in New York, you will see that this is very different from what we have, and it's much more streamlined. Chatbots are these little boxes that you have on a screen sometimes on websites. They used to be quite basic, and they now Facebook is very active in this field. Facebook Messenger is used, I think now you have about 250,000 different bots which are working with Facebook. Use artificial intelligence now and are able to interact to a great level. I will mention some examples later on. And generally, artificial intelligence helps use natural language. So again, if you have time, we don't, but go on YouTube and look for IBM Watson, which is the artificial intelligence powered by Watson being the actual brain, so to speak, designed by IBM. If you look IBM Watson M&A, you will have a video that shows you a real-time conversation between two people and Watson about selecting a target for an M&A transaction. It is quite stunning. So natural language means that you just speak as we are speaking now. So you don't need to type things or input data. So AI in insurance, I'll mention a few examples just to give you, unless you're already familiar with all these things. So I mentioned Lemonade, very, very clever interface. So I mentioned IBM Watson, so the artificial intelligence. There's a Japanese company, Fukuoka Mutual Life, replaced about 34 employees. I think they also indicated that that would save them about, I think it's 40,000 hours per year in claims management. And that was a few months ago, in January. So Emerge, we work with Startup Bootcamp, which is an incubator in London, and they have many incubators, but they have one on InsurTech. What they do is every year they select 10 startups in the InsurTech sector. So one of them, they had the presentation a few weeks ago in London, and it was quite stunning. I was very impressed by Emerge. What Emerge does looks very simple. You're an insurance company, they will plug into your portfolio of clients, and they will give you with 99% accuracy the list of the clients who will lapse or terminate their policy within 1 year with a 99% accuracy. So they explain it takes them about, on a normal portfolio, it takes about 8 hours, and the increase in margin is about 25%. So you can see the impact of this thing. And I don't think these guys are even from the insurance industry. One other example I didn't mention here, but I thought about it yesterday when we were going through the vineyards. A South African startup working with drones and mapping out, working specifically in agriculture. So what they do is they throw the drones above a field, and their artificial intelligence technology and machine learning and everything will basically map out the field, will identify what it is, what crops or trees they are. It will even, at a very granular level, so at the level of the crop, it will give you the the productivity based on the climate, on how the crop looks, and on the ground. So you can make projections, of course, on how much you're going to produce, but also they are in the InsurTech Startup Bootcamp incubator for one simple reason, is that when you have weather claims, when you have claims like our guide yesterday had with frost, for example, you don't actually need to go there and look at your crops one by one. You just throw the drones and they will basically compare before and after. And working with insurance companies, they agree that this is a proper way of settling claims, and you will have a very granular assessment of the damage caused to your crops without even going there. So again, there are South Africans, of course. You can see imagine the size of some of the fields that are concerned by this technology. The gain of time, the gain of money is incredible. Right, but we're lawyers, or at least we're talking about law. So what about the legal questions? Well, first, artificial intelligence, like any other device, is going to be collecting data. So obviously there will be questions as to what sort of data is collected and what is done with it. Again, I don't know if you've been recently on Google Translate. Google is obviously very advanced and Google has been working on artificial intelligence for a very, very long time. And one of the applications they have now of their artificial intelligence project is Google Translate. And actually there was an article by, I think it was a Japanese professor who happened to be using Google Translate when they switched to their new artificial intelligence. So it's also machine learning. So for example, if you input a text in one language and ask for the translation, you can make modifications. I've tried with insurance legal text, and it's quite stunning. The result is already quite stunning. But also when you change things, for example, if you change insured by policyholder, it will learn about it. Now, how much does Google Translate know who I am and can link what I've translated? Do they store the data? It raises all sorts of questions. If I input text from a contract, from a client, for example, is there a data leak potential? What is recorded? It's questions that were already there, but because the interaction with artificial intelligence becomes more sophisticated, the type of data that is transferred is also changing. One of the discussions we had yesterday was also about machine learning itself. So taking again my example of a prosthesis, I get this artificial intelligence powered artificial arm, for example, and it will learn about me. It will learn about what I do, how I use my arms. Is that data? Well, certainly it's my data, and if it's not legally, if it doesn't fit in the box of data as defined legally, certainly it's something that is mine, and if I need to replace that limb, or if for some reason I lose that limb, I do not want this experience, so I don't want this knowledge that has been learned by the machine, so it's not data that I've transferred literally to the machine, it's data that has been produced by the machine itself and processed by the machine itself, which is very sensitive and is mine. And that leads to, we'll speak later on about Internet of Things, and again, Internet of Things, you have objects which are connected, interacting with each other, and generating and processing data by themselves. Still, this is data, and what is the status of that data? And is the current legislation really adapted to all the potential linked to these sort of interactions and data production? I'm sorry I have a lot of questions, I may not have a lot of answers so far, but that's the reality, I think. A second point is the legal status of artificial intelligence and of robots. I know it sounds a bit like science fiction, but some scholars have really asked the question. The question was first asked a few years ago when, if I take French law, for example, French law only knows humans and objects. There's nothing in between. So an animal is not a human, so it is treated legally as an object. And of course, the law has evolved to take into account the fact, for example, and the French law does provide that an animal has a sensitivity and must be protected. And I'm not talking about criminal law, of course, but even civil law has evolved in order to take into account that the fact that an animal is not just any other object. So there are calls for a reflection on whether we need a specific status for AI. You can see, for example, in the medical field for assisting when you have artificial intelligence powering robots which are of humanoid appearance and anticipating the evolution of these machines, you can anticipate that the interaction with these machines will become more and more human-like. So there are reflections on that. I mentioned the challenges posed by human enhancement and AI-powered prosthesis before. Third point, liability. Of course, that's an obvious issue for lawyers when you look at artificial intelligence, but we can break it down. You have product liability applied to AI. I'm taking my prosthetic example again because I think it's quite a useful example. If something goes wrong, well, it can be hardware, it can be software. Perhaps the machine didn't learn correctly. Perhaps it is starting to behave like a human being, and human beings make errors. So at what stage, the real question in product liability is who is liable for what? Currently, if you have a car, if your car breaks down and it was a defect in the manufacturing, it's fairly easy to corner it and determine that the manufacturer made a mistake, and tort is structured around that principle. So in France, you have, you need damage, you need a cause of damage and a causal link. If my recollection is correct, it's a long time ago, but in tort, in English law, you have a duty of care, breach of duty, and then you look at the remoteness of damage. That doesn't really work when you have a machine that is learning by itself, and it's very difficult to determine whether it is a software defect, a hardware defect, or just the way the artificial intelligence works. And many of these devices, when you ask the people who make them run, they set them up, and then they make them learn with throwing a lot of data at them. And at the end, you put something in, and something comes out, and you ask the programmer, and they will tell you, I have no idea how it works. Just because that's the nature of the thing, it evolves. So product liability, quite challenging. Contractual liability and tort, again, we've seen that with connected cars, intelligent cars. Who is liable if there is an accident? Is it the manufacturer because the car didn't behave properly when it should have? Is it the driver because the driver is there and may have intervened? These are some of the many issues you can imagine with artificial intelligence being involved in accident damage, and the nature of the damage will change. And that leads to the point I was making before about the transparency of decision making. And there are calls for interoperability and the need for standards. Currently, the standards that we have generally are, ISO, for example. So, when you build a car, when you build a house, you have to comply with certain standards. There's nothing like that in artificial intelligence. And for example, that's a major issue for the Internet of Things, which I will mention a bit earlier, but connected devices produce a lot of data, and there is no interoperability, there is no standard. So it is, when you have no standard on the software and how the software is designed, it is very difficult to secure the software, just because each one will be different. And so the vulnerabilities will be different from one object to the other. And I'll come to that later, but that is really a major issue. Finally, there's a lot out there in terms of documentation, and I need to go a bit quicker. But I would strongly encourage you to go and see the Parliament report. The European Parliament did a report with recommendations on civil law rules on robotics. And it basically touches upon a lot of the issues and goes quite in a lot of detail. I think it's one of the best documents I've read on the topic. So AI, artificial intelligence and risk. Well, I think we've mentioned a lot of these, and I think I have 5 minutes left, so I'll go as quickly as possible. We'll touch upon it later, but data leaks, property, liability. In property, for example, what we're seeing, for example, in the UK, is insurance companies providing you with a kit that will detect leaks, that will detect entrance. They're all connected, smoke detectors, and in fact, combined with other technology, you can anticipate, and your house can actually tell you that you're very likely to have a leak in the next few days, and actually make, contact someone to come to repair them. Legislative and regulatory challenges, well, it is a global issue, and it is not being tackled at global level for the moment. So you have Asia, in Asia, you have very advanced reflections on these issues. Europe, it's beginning at the European Union level. Some member states are much more advanced than others in promoting and using different technologies. So the European Parliament makes some suggestion, which I know will make a lot of the insurance representatives in the room shiver. As usual, there is always a suggestion of compulsory insurance, which itself triggers the necessity of having a guarantee fund without really going into the reflection as to whether that is really the proper way of doing things. So this compulsory insurance and guarantee fund and moral hazard, I've been hearing about that for the last 20 years in insurance. So that's going to be a challenge, again. Right, I don't know if you have any questions on artificial intelligence or remarks, or these are things that you knew already, perhaps. So in 2.5 minutes, the Internet of Things, so I will not read it, but basically I think we all understand what they are. Connected objects that interact either with you or with each other. I gave the example of the connecting small devices, and which detects the anomalies. In 1999, there was a study that predicted 6.4 billion connected devices would exist, and today we're not sure, but it's probably about right. So in 1915, the European Commission launched it's called the Alliance for Internet of Things Innovation, which is an association which is led by industry, so it's not led by the Commission, and the idea is to have reflections on all these issues. So identify issues. I will not go through all of them. I would say that the real problem of the Internet of Things that has, of course, an impact for us lawyers is security, and with security comes with the lack of security come a lot of risks. There is a certain legal background first, and it's not on the slide, but it is interesting to know that there is no obligation for manufacturers to make safe devices. And actually, HP has, HP, so the computer manufacturer, they estimate that about 70% of connected devices are not secure. And the lifespan of a connected device is very short. It's a few months, usually, perhaps a year. And usually the problem is poor software design, proprietary software design again, no updates, no security, and especially one of the issues is that there is rarely an interface with a human being. So when you have your computer with Windows, it will tell you, I need to be updated. If you have a connected smoke detector, it will tell you nothing, and you will not know if it's not updated. Some examples: 2016, so that's last year. Krebs on Security, so that's a security consultancy firm, IT security consultancy firm. They were hit by DDoS, so denial of service attack. So it's, I don't know if you know what it is, but basically it's, in this case it was 145,000 connected objects which were infected by the Mirai virus that attacked their servers at the same time. So basically your servers go down, and there is a risk in these situations of having data leaks, of illegal penetration of your network and stealth data. So that was 145,000 devices that were used in that attack. And in the same year, there was a similar attack that brought down PayPal, Twitter, and Spotify. Why? Poorly secure device. One of the issues is passwords. When you get your connected device, it's got a default password that people will not change. There are actually websites where you can have, say where you are, and they will list all the connected device with the nature of the device in your neighborhood. And some of these devices, I think, for example, in the UK, there was Virgin was shipping routers with default passwords. People don't change the passwords. It means that your network is open to anyone who knows that password, which means the whole world. Weak software and hardware, and lack of updates. So this leads to an uncertain legal background. Frank will speak about smart contracts and then enforceability, so I will not speak about that. But there are jurisdictional and applicable law issues because the networks are centralized. You have sometimes very little human interaction, and of course data protection and privacy issues. So just to finish, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things are one of many components of the innovation impacting the insurance industry. Frank will speak about how, for example, Internet of Things and other technologies allow for smart contracts. That's fundamental for the insurance industry, of course. You will also have heard or will hear about parametric insurance, which has been around for a while, but in that context is becoming, with artificial intelligence and all these technologies, has great potential. So there's a case example which I will not go into because I think Frank will speak about how it works.